What's up, everybody? It's the Starting Five. He is Coach Nick. I'm Ben. Glad to have you along with us for the ride. And, Coach, we begin today with Rajon Rondo. We'll start with the one. Looking like he's going to be set to return for Boston. He sent out a very cryptic tweet on Monday that he would return soon. I believe the tweet was 29,233,380 seconds. So very, very specific from Rondo. But with the way that Boston's playing, they've lost 9 straight and 12 of their last 13. Do you see any reason to really rush him back at this point?
It's a great question, and I've seen that number on Lost, so I know that it must mean something about, having to input numbers on a computer. So, and I think that if they play him, then the whole thing is going to blow up. Their whole plan. It's clear that Danny Ainge has, a Jabari Parker plan in place who would fit in beautifully there. So I can't believe they would trade him, though, in an effort to keep that record down. He's too good of a you'll never get anything in return that matches what he can bring. And so that's what I'm struggling with to understand how that's going to work, unless they slowly bring him back and they have a minutes restriction that will impact their win-loss record.
Right, I agree with you. I think the Ainge plan for now has been so far very successful. Yeah, and I think Parker would look. Listen, Parker would look very, very good with a lot of teams, but I think particularly with Boston, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're trying to tank, you want to try and keep Rondo out for as long as possible, unless you're trying to trade him. And Brad Stevens has said that that's not something that they really want to do. You're going to make sure he's 100% and then be patient when he returns. But unless you're trying to get as much value for Rondo as you can, I don't think that's going to happen this season. And to me, you're just sort of forcing a situation where you could really make something with Rondo there. I think he could be still a very, very effective player.
That's the key. And as a coach, I don't see how you would not want to have a guy like Rondo play for you. I know they had an issue with Doc Rivers, but the bottom line is he does play defense. He looks to pass. He is a fantastic passer, and he's just an exciting player, a guy I would want to play for me any day of the week.
From Boston to New York, Coach, the Knicks and the Nets are actually two of the hotter teams in the NBA, which was a complete sort of laughingstock for both these teams just a couple weeks ago. Both teams are 15-22. The Nets have a winning record at home, actually, at the Barclays Center. One of those wins was a very impressive win against the Heat. Same thing with the Knicks, and they actually have the final and 8th playoff spot in the East. Now, we know how bad the East is. So when you're 15-22 and you have that final spot, it's not saying a whole lot. But I'm looking at the Atlantic Division, and we'll get to Toronto in a little bit. But how many Eastern Conference teams do you see coming out of the Atlantic for a playoff spot this year?
It's going to shake out a lot differently than what we see today. There's no question we're going to have a couple teams go on some sort of a run like this, and that'll vault them up the stands. So it's almost impossible to even really predict. I don't think the Knicks right now aren't in playoff position. They have to have some teams fall back. It's possible, but I don't know. It's hard for me to see both New York and Brooklyn getting in the playoffs for some reason.
I agree with you. I think if I had to take, between those three teams, I'll take Toronto just based on the way that they're playing right now, and I think they're going to be all in. And I think if it was between New York and Brooklyn, I'm leaning towards New York simply because they really haven't had Chandler for the type of stretches that they want, and he changes that team. And look at the way that they've responded when Shumpert has played more minutes. He's been really, really effective for them. And I also look at New York in the sense that they have a less chance of breaking down later on in the stretch than Brooklyn does, just because there's not as many old guys on the roster.
Well, okay. I mean, if you want to ignore Tyson Chandler, who's already been having a problem this year, and
I'm talking at the end of the season. I think at some point they'll get healthy and get themselves a little bit back on track. Versus Brooklyn, they've had some injury situations too. I just don't see everybody holding up at the end.
Right, and that's fair enough. And Brook Lopez is out anyway for the rest of the year, so it doesn't even matter. I believe he's out for the rest of the year. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
So yeah, so they're already going to be a man down no matter what. And if the Knicks can keep that somewhat intact, yeah, they'll have an advantage. I'm just not sold on the Knicks, and we're going to do a game breakdown coming up soon. All the Knicks fans have been coming at me on Twitter to explain how good they're going to be. So I'm going to dive deep into there. But right now, if that's what you're selling, I'm not buying just yet.
We'll stay with the Atlantic for just one more segment here, Coach, because we talked about them last time, and they still continue to play well. It's the Toronto Raptors that are now 8-2 in their last 10. They're 13-5 since they traded Rudy Gay. 19-17. Still not a great record, but it's leading the Atlantic. And Mike Antron wrote in the Toronto Sun today that Kyle Lowry deserves to be an All-Star. So my question to you is he? And should the Raptors be all in at this point when that clearly wasn't the situation they were going to be in at the beginning of the season?
You know, Lowry is not an all-star. Let's just get that right. He's a nice player. He's good. But as far as my take on what an all-star should be, he's not quite there yet. I mean, if you look at his numbers, it's 16 points a game and 7 assists. That's good, but it's not quite all-star numbers, even in the Eastern Conference. So, you know, they're on their way. But by the way, the Toronto will be the third-place team in the conference by the end of the year. I'm convinced of that.
They've been impressive. And if you're looking at Lowry as to whether or not he's an all-star or not, I agree in the sense that you sort of look at his numbers and think, okay, maybe he's close. He's a really nice player, but he's not the all-star. But if you look at the remaining point guards by comparison, based on player efficiency rating, 8 of the top 10 are in the West. So based on that, he's not an all-star. But 2 of them are in the East. The number 6 overall point guard is Kyrie Irving, and number 10 is Kyle Lowry. That puts him 1 ahead of John Wall. And I think Wall's having a really nice year, and the Wizards are certainly getting themselves back on track. But if you're truly, if you're really going to base it off of numbers and you really believe in player efficiency rating, Lowry's the more deserving point guard over Wall.
You know what? It's a first here. I might have to backtrack and say you're right because of the notion of who's left.
Yes.
And you're right. You're right. If that's the case, and that's how it lines up with the absence of other guards that we know Kyrie's going to get in. Even because he got in last year, he'll just be a perennial all-star.
Sure.
And so yeah. You know what? I think I might buy that now that you put it that way.
Wow. We got a Byron Lowry now from you, Coach.
I don't let it be said I haven't changed my mind, and don't call me a flip-flopper though.
No, that's for you to tell. That's for you to tell me.
Right.
Rick Bucher, coach of Bleacher Report, was talking about the Clippers. Let's finally get out west a little bit. He's reporting that the Clippers were at least exploring the possibility of trading either DeAndre Jordan or Blake Griffin because they really don't play well with each other on the floor. And actually, the quote was, Clippers coach Doc Rivers took great offense recently to report that the team had discussed dealing young star forward Blake Griffin to the New York Knicks for a slightly older star forward in Carmelo Anthony. That's a whole separate talking point in and of itself. But Bucher says that they have a need for a stretch four who can hit outside shots, and one NBA executive said that they'd be better with Love, Aldridge, or possibly even David West. Now, you can look at Griffin, you know the type of impact he has and the star power he has in LA, which is important, but should they trade Blake Griffin?
You know, certainly Love is a much more dangerous player and would probably fit in a lot better there.
Yes.
I mean, here's the thing. When you look at Blake Griffin's numbers, how much more would you want the guy to do? I mean, geez, the guy fills up the stat sheet. So his issues we know are the jump shot is going to be very up and down. His free throws all of a sudden have been really good, but we have to wait and see if that's like going to stay. And then his post moves are also all over the place as well. His footwork is just all over the place. So any of those names you mentioned are an upgrade. You know, but I just don't see how, you know, those kind of deals generally don't really happen. You don't normally trade a star for a star like that. And I don't know. I would be surprised. And I think Doc Rivers said the exact right thing. Even if they are talking about it, you don't want to have that swirling around. So he put an end to that discussion, I thought, pretty well.
Yeah, and I think that's what a veteran, smart coach does in that type of situation is you squash the rumors as soon as you can, and you hope that it doesn't become a discussion point the rest of the way. Griffin's outside shooting numbers, they're up, but they're still not necessarily ideal to where you hope he can be. But I will say this. If the Clippers are trying to win a title this year, which they are, you can't be afraid to make your team better this year and potentially make a mistake. Now, I wouldn't probably trade for David West, but those other two names, you know, if in a heartbeat with Aldridge and with Love, especially if they won't lock in an extension. Griffin is clearly one of the faces of the Clippers, but you'd have to be willing to part with him if you can make your team championship caliber. And with a guy like Love or a guy like Aldridge, and I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think either of those two teams want to trade them. But if it were offered, I'd accept that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, they have a ceiling right now, and it's not championship level just yet. They don't have a deep enough bench. They don't have enough. They don't just sort of play well enough together, and that could simply be time with a new coach and all these new players, and Redick was injured and coming back, and they simply might have to be patient. And in theory, if that developed better, then yeah, by next year, they could be championship ready with this team. So it's really going to be a question of how patient they're going to be and whether or not they want to see if they can gel. But again, normally it's difficult to make those trades when you're involving multiple superstars basically, and so I wouldn't think that they're going to make a move before the trade deadline.
No, I don't think so either as well. Final one on the docket today, Coach. We go back out to the East where President Obama, regardless of whether you agree with his policies or not, you can agree on one thing: he's very good at zinging players whenever they come and visit the White House. The Heat visited President Obama in the White House today, and the president made a little funny at Mario Chalmers' expense.
With that, I think we should take a picture, but we should make it quick before one of these guys starts yelling at Mario.
I think that might be one of the best presidential zings to a player of all time. That was pretty good.
Absolutely. And you know what? Interestingly enough, it does bring up a point in a funny way of how I think it's ridiculous how they treat him. And somebody should put a stop to it either way, because you see those public outbursts. You can only imagine if they are yelling at him behind closed doors, too. But I have to tell you, if you're not a fan of Obama after today, then I'm not sure if that would ever happen.
No, I completely agree. And listen, if you're someone like Chalmers, and if it's gotten to the point where LeBron now has to tweet like, no, Chalmers is my guy, I love him like a brother, then maybe you tone it down a little bit. But I hope for his sake he just starts getting yelled at a little bit less. But listen, the more jokes that come along with it, the funnier it is for me, and then you and I can talk about it.
Well, don't forget, in 2 of those finals games, he was pretty much the best player on the floor.
Yes, he was. It's a great point.
People were yelling at me on Twitter for that. I'm like, listen, that's true. The guy was the only guy attacking and making plays, and so he deserves, in my mind, a little bit more respect. He's like the Rodney Dangerfield. Let's get that cleaned up, and let's get him. Let's get respect for Mario.
There you go. And
hey, by the way, he could be the Eastern Conference point guard on the All-Star team. No. His numbers are not good enough, but he's good.
No. He's a really nice player. He's a nice player. He's going to be a key contributor for that team. Him and Norris Cole. It's a nice spot at the 1. So there you go. Coach and I covered all here. It's the starting 5. We will be back next week with another brand spanking edition show. Watch the B-ball breakdowns. Listen to Coach. Learn from Coach. And Coach, give the world something to remember at the end of tonight's show.
Oh, wow. You're putting it on me to say something really, amazing. Well,
you can just go with no flipping, and we could end it right here.
That's right. Well, then I'll do that. And if you don't know what no flipping means, then I defy you to look it up and figure out what I'm referencing when I say no flipping.
We'll talk to you next week. Thanks, everybody.